I'm Jeff Cote with Pacific Yacht Systems. Some of you might know us, some of you might not. We specialize on electronics and electrical systems on boats. That's what we do. And today, the purpose of this conversation or this presentation is to introduce the popular electronic products that were released either at the end of 2015 but are being released now. This is the latest and greatest products within the marine segment. We write the Tech Talk articles in Pacific Yachting, and a part of that we also do the electronics review, which is happening and being printed for next month's Pacific Yachting. This is kind of a taste of what we're going to be discussing in that article. So we do a write-up every year, and for the first time this year, we're just giving people at the boat show a little bit of apprehension of why are we focusing on those products during our article. Here's kind of the agenda. We're going to be looking at all the different type of choices that you have out there, a time of an intro in terms of electronics choices, a quick overview on different types of products that you can have on boat, electronics products. This is not going to be electrical, it's going to be strictly electronics. And then we're going to look at 15 new products for 2016, and I'm going to open the floor for question and answers as well. When you are deciding on electronic products, you should always ask yourself, not every product is suited for everyone. And it's really important that you don't necessarily look at what's happening left or right. It's really about what's important for you. Some people are going to go in the inside passage, are going to go up to all the way to Alaska, and other ones are just going to do the Gulf Islands. So always make sure when you're thinking about what you want to do aboard your boat that you don't necessarily copy boat to the left or to the right, because there's really a product really tailored for everyone. And there's no one best product for everyone. Okay, so there's a little bit of thought process that has to happen there. You know, the other point that I would say is, very rarely do you get on a boat and you rip everything out. There's a lot of integration and retrofitting that you can do on electronics. And so you can start with what you have and add on, and you can, of course, starting green and starting fresh on everything is easy, but it's expensive. So take that into consideration when you're choosing your products. And the other big question that you can think about is, especially now there's a bigger trend, is everything's leaning towards multifunctional displays, right? Versus which is an all-in-one. And then you can also then have people that are saying, no, I just want a sounder, I just want a radar. But that's harder and harder to do these days because manufacturers are aggregating multiple functionalities on one display. So you're going to have one display, an all-in-one display, which is called an MFD now. That's going to do radar, sounder, Chartplotter, AIS, and you're going to have all these different layers on that one. It's like a TV. TV isn't CNN, it's not ABC, it's not CBC. It's a display. What you see on that display is for you to decide, okay? Even on the bigger boats, sometimes what we've stopped seeing is we've got clients that have multifunctional displays on a bridge, and they'll just say, that display can do everything, but I only want it to be a sounder. That display can do anything, but I'll never change it off nav. And same thing, so they're basically locking a channel on that display and saying, that's my sounder, that's my Chartplotter, that's my radar. But realistically, if another captain came on board, another boat owner, they could just simply do whatever they want because the displays can do anything, okay? So that approach that we had in the past where we had a device or a display per sensor is slowly eroding, and it's harder and harder to find just a radar display. They still are out there, but it's much harder to do that. And the other question is, are you going to have single helm or dual helm? That's another factor when you're deciding products. Lastly, you're going to go button, touchscreen, or you're going to go hybrid. Some manufacturers give you the option of doing both, and that's something to think about. The other thing that I want to talk about is that when you're making a decision on which product that we're going to be talking about is, are you going to be focusing on a product that's feature rich, right? That can do everything. Like for example, think of the difference between Apple and Microsoft, or Android and iPhone. Android phones are better phones than Apple. They are. It's not, nobody debates it. Everything is better about an Android phone other than simplicity. Right? Apple's phones are not the best phones. They say they're best, but they're not. Everyone agrees that their hardware, everything about them is worse than every other phone pretty much, other than one thing. They're simple to use, right? And so that's a trade-off too that you've got to think about when you're choosing what's important to you, right? Do I want something that can do everything? Or Or am I an owner that's going to do very little and I just want it to be easy to use? I did a presentation at the beginning of the boat show on boating apps. Some people are certainly leaning that way. I have my hesitations as a primary display, but that's certainly out there. Or integrating and having it as an add-on. And then looking obviously at electrical, and then certain brands have certain proprietary products that no other brands have, and that's something to always think about. You know, before I go in again, I just want to say these are types of products that are out there, and each brand has its advantages. Like Garmin is really effectively kind of like Apple. Raymarine, Simrad are kind of similar. They're more function rich, and they're a little bit harder to use, but that doesn't mean they're not good. An Android phone can be amazing, is you can do a lot more with them. And Garmin is simpler. Same price points, but it really depends on, are you really going to get involved with your Chartplotter, or you just want to look at the screen and not really touch anything. Furuno is commercial grade. We see it on a lot of trawlers, bigger boats, right? So price point is much higher. And before you buy a Furuno product, and there's nothing wrong with Furuno, have a look at the manual. It's a small Bible. It's intense. It's really intense. And so for an owner that really is not into it, it really isn't that intuitive. But the flip side is it's the best. It's gonna work. It's commercial grade. You're gonna pay premium for it, but it's not meant for people that don't like reading manuals. It's just not. Lowrance has got a good reputation on smaller boats. They're going up, and they're great with Fishfinders, really good price point. Simrad has a big resurgence, and they're tied into also B&G. So when you're going to be choosing a Chartplotter, think about all these different things. And by the way, this presentation is online on our website, and you can access it at our media page, and there's a tab in there, presentations, boat show presentations 2016, and all of that presentation is on a PDF. So if you want to look at it.
Just a quick question. I looked last night. It isn't there yet.
It's
not going to come.
It's going to come after the presentation.
That's what well, the ones that you did still aren't up there.
Oh, really? Okay, well, let me look.
It shows them there, but it says they're not available yet, so it's
okay.
confusing.
All right, I'll look into that. Thank you. One of the points I just want to bring is generally with a screen, honestly, I know it's more money, but very rarely does an owner regret going with a bigger screen. Very rarely. So if you're close or you're on the edge and you're undecided and you're hesitating between an 8 and a 10 inch and it can fit a 10 and the price difference is $200-300 and you're really uncertain, you probably would lean spending more money because very few people change their electronics more frequently than every 10 years. And a lot of them go to 15 years. So that decision that you make today is minimum a 10-year decision, realistically, and probably a 15-year decision. Nobody's changing electronics every 3 years. I mean, it happens, but that's like one client every 2 years that I see that has new electronic. He's like, screw it, let's just do it all over again. Nobody does that. So whatever decision you make sure it's the right one for you, because you're probably not going to do it again for a long time. All right, so we'll talk about the first product. First product is, big fan, is Furuno, the TZtouch. It's definitely TZtouch, for some of you that are familiar, what they've done is time zero. Before, in the past, what used to happen with Chartplotters or MFDs is there used to be a lot of lag, meaning you would do an action and the reaction to that action would take a lot of time. So Furuno, what they came out in a few years ago is the concept of time zero, meaning when you do an action, there's a reaction. There's a feedback right away. You zoom out, the screen zooms out. You zoom in, it zooms in. Everything is immediate. So they really spent a lot of money on the processor so that you wouldn't be pressing zoom in and you'd have to wait 3 seconds for it to zoom in. The other big thing about it is they're also really interesting is they do a lot of more kind of animation looking to their vector charts. So they'll make the charts look really interesting and it's gonna look almost 3D-ish. It's almost like you literally are in an airplane at a certain site and you can see the buildings. They're really making it, now for some of us that's a good thing, for other ones it isn't, so it's up to you to decide. But they have all these enhancements that they do with the cartography to make it better. And it also works, Furuno bought Nobletech. And so on some boats, what they'll do is they'll match a Nobletech navigation system on a computer with a TZtouch, and you can integrate, okay? We find that most owners that do Furuno are generally trawlers, certainly popular, Grand Banks, Ocean Alexanders, Northhavens, people that generally want to look like they have a ship, generally is what they do, because if you look in the harbor, it's all Furuno. Like real boats, like the real big ships, have Furuno. So generally the owners of those boats want to feel like they have a ship. And so for them, it's not a question necessarily of what they want, it's the look of the boat. Furuno fits that mold. Okay, so a lot of people choose Furuno because that's what everyone expects to see on that type of boat. Nothing wrong with it. All of our high-end clients, like we did Shaw's boat on a 75 Donzi, we did the Charles family's boat, we're doing a 145 right now. Everyone's choosing Furuno. I mean, it's commercial grade. There's nothing wrong with it except it's expensive and it's hard to use. But it's gonna be reliable. Okay, you won't change that for 20 years. And a lot of fishermen have Furuno stuff that's 30 years old, 40 years old, and they still swear by it, right? And they're like, there's a whole business in refurbishing old Furuno equipment. Nobody throws it away. Like, you've got an old Furuno, somebody wants it. That's the type of brand loyalty that you have with Furuno, okay? B&G is a product that was, or a product line that was bought by Navico. Navico is an umbrella company that owns Simrad, B&G, and Lowrance. The advantage of having an umbrella company that owns multiple product lines is that the engineering for that company is shared and innovation is shared along different product lines. So what's interesting about B&G for some of you that are sailors is that you'll have advantage of getting broadband radar, which is only available within Navico. And broadband radar it's a big deal. It's been out for about 5 years, but it's radar that's really good at close quarters. Like if you light up broadband in the river in Captain's Cove, and you're in, Captain's Cove, and you're going down in Ladner, you can actually see individual pilings 10 feet from your boat down the river. You can see a broomstick at the bow of your boat. So it's great for close target acquisition. Traditional radar is 1/8 of a nautical mile is kind of the scale. This goes to 4 times that, 1/32. So if you're using it for anchoring or for close quarter navigation, broadband radar makes a lot of sense. And the other advantage too is that you can have it the power draw is about 40% of a traditional radar. So we have sailors that are going to Vic Maui, and so they'll lean towards B&G or Simrad because their power requirements are limited. You can't run the engine under propulsion. There's in a race. So that would be a product. And the B&G Vulcan is an entry level, and it's not priced more than any other product. Like if you look across the product line, Garmin, Raymarine, it's at the same price point. It used to be double everything, like literally double. We did a Swan 75 this summer. We did everything on the boat. And originally the equipment was B&G, and it was literally a huge amount of money, like stupid, like well over 100,000 for the electronics, probably 150. And when we swapped it out to the new B&G, it was literally less than half the original price. So they brought down the price point on B&G to have it completely comparable to other products. So if you're a sailor, it might make sense to consider B&G because you're not actually paying double the price. It's like buying a Mercedes for the price of a Toyota. So it's something you should consider if you're buying a Chartplotter on a sailboat. All right, here we talk a little bit about, what is a sounder, a sonar, a Fishfinder. These are words that are used interchangeably to talk about similar things, right? A lot of devices now have it integrated. So you can have fish finding capabilities, image of the bottom, and it's built in. Only 5 years ago, a lot of it had to be done on a black box separately. So you had to actually have a black box, and then that black box would connect to your MFD. Now a lot of them actually have it built in within the display. And then different types of through hauls, in-haul, true haul, in-haul, transit mount. Chirp, I've wrote a lot about articles about that. It's super popular this year. And then some new products are actually having forward-looking sonar. So you can actually in front of your boat. So that could be handy if you're doing outside Vancouver Island or you're going to places that are a little sketchy and you want to know if there's a rock ahead of you at low speed, of course, and you're trying to find an entrance somewhere or a shoal. This might allow you to do that. So Garmin came out with a product line that is really interesting. It's their middle of the range product line. So, you know, $1,000 kind of thing. And what they've done is they're doing this down view, side view. So this actually doing 3D imaging of the bottom as you're going forward. So for people that are like gunk holing, this will actually show you everything of your boat. It's scanning everything sideways up to 300 feet. Slow speeds, but you're anchoring, so it's fine. And as you move forward, you're actually imaging the whole bottom around you. So you can find shoals, rocks, ledges. People use it for bait ball, for fishing. It's pretty crazy. And the really good one I like is for people that cruise in the same areas that aren't well charted, but you're there repeatedly. It actually measures the depth under your boat all the time, obviously, and it's data logging that, and it's creating your own charts on top of your charts to give you your own data. So you'll be populating this area. So if you're going to an area all the time, fishing, for example, on the south side of Laskiti or south side of Thormanby, and the charts are limited value, they're good, but they're not great, and you want extra type of data, this is actually, as you're always there, it's going to give you more and more soundings, and you'll add like way more details for the bottom so that you can be better at fishing. So it does that just built into the unit. The other thing Garmin was the first to do, which they do, is auto guidance. So if you want to go from A to B, what this device does easily is it's like, well, how am I going to, what's my route? I want to leave Vancouver, I'm in False Creek, and I want to go to Sylvia Bay. I want to go to Secret Cove. I want to go to Montague. It's going to show you a route, a safe route on how to get from A to B. And then if you have an autopilot that's tied to it, you could have your autopilot follow the route. Obviously, buyer beware. I mean, you can't blame Garmin. There's a huge disclaimer. It's a suggestion. It's up to you to follow the route if not. I mean, I use it to figure out the distance between A's and B's. I would always look at a route before I followed it. Even the ones I create, I double check. You should double check it, because if there's an error, you can land on the rocks, literally, right? So, but it's nice and convenient to know how to get between A and B quickly. The other product that might be interesting for some of you that have tenders or smaller boats, especially if you're putting crab traps, is having a handheld sonar. So if you're doing crab traps and you're putting them or trying to figure out where you're going, this might be it's a little handheld sonar you just put over the water and you can know what the depth is. All right, I talked a little bit earlier about radar. So these are the difference between pulse radar and broadband radar, and you can see a little bit what the differences are. People that go offshore that really want to see far are not going to put broadband radar because the top end range is not as good as a pulse. So it's not for everyone, but it certainly has its benefits in being a very low power consumption. Raymarine came out with this quantum radar, what's interesting about it is actually it's transmitting the signal from the radar to the MFD over Wi-Fi. For some of you that have sailboats, or depending on the build of your powerboat, running a cable from a radar to a helm can be extremely time consuming on a sailboat if you're putting it on the mast. Like, it's not a 4-hour job. You know, if you're routing that cable down the mast, through the bilges, all the way back, up through the binnacle into an aft pod, that could take easily 2 days of work. Could be 3 days of work. Just running the cable in the mast might be a showstopper. You might not even be able to do it. So what's interesting about that is as long as you have power, the radar is going to be transmitting the information from the radar to the Chartplotter over Wi-Fi. And it's also a chirp radar. So pretty interesting for owners that have limited options or crazy routing between A and B on the boat. So this is going to make the installation a lot easier and simpler to do that, and that's new. Furuno last year came up with a wireless radar as well. We installed one on a client's boat, and it only shows up on an iPad. So the client didn't want to spend a lot of money, but he wanted radar. So he's got a radar. You just connect power to it. You download an app. You log in to literally the radar, and you see the radar on your iPad. So, I mean, it's not for everyone, but someone that wants a low-cost radar solution on a boat that they don't think they need radar, but they got caught in fog once and they'll never forget, that might be a good way to kind of alleviate your fear of being stuck in radar again, okay? Simrad came out with this unbelievable broadband radar, the Halo one. And it's really good. It's for bigger ships, trawlers and maybe 40 foot up probably. An open array is not something you would see typically on a boat smaller than 40, unless it's a Black Cove or a Hinkley. It's disproportionate to the size of the boat. But if you're going offshore, some owners like to go fishing or outside Vancouver Island, they're maybe gonna go down the coast. This type of radar is definitely a radar to consider, but only available if you have Simrad on board. Simrad is gaining a lot of market share, like unbelievable amount of market share, and it's very similar to Raytheon, which is Raymarine. They're really head to head. It's like BMW, Mercedes. You could be sold on one completely, but arguably they're similar. There's pros and cons of each. They're both in the same ballpark, and some people swear by one or the other, and there's advantages to each one. But Simrad is definitely a player in the market right now, and a lot of owners that are choosing completely new electronics are considering Simrad, okay? As opposed to doing, before ubiquitous was Raymarine everywhere. Some people now are like, okay, well, if I'm not gonna do Raymarine, what else am I gonna do? And Simrad and Garmin are the two main choices, but Simrad is definitely a big player. AIS, what's AIS? AIS stands for Automatic Identification System, and what that translates to from a boater perspective is sending boat data, navigation data, and information about the boat to other boats over VHF frequencies. So it's boat to boat. You don't need any other repeaters. So if the whole world fell apart and there was boats out at sea, the whole land could be gone. The boats can actually start talking to one another directly over VHF frequencies, sending data. So that's really handy for owners that are going to Vic Maui, for example. Commercial boats are transmitting their location, their position all the time. If you have an AIS receiver on your boat, you're going to see a freighter bearing down on you, leaving LAX, going to Tokyo. You're going to actually see it before you could ever see it with your radar, because VHF frequencies travel much further than a radar can see because of the curvature of the earth, or your eyes can see. And in local waters, what that translates to is that you can actually see a collision course between two boats that are very far away. Now, it's obvious to be on a collision course, sailboat to sailboat going 6 knots. I mean, if you hit another sailboat at 6 knots in the Strait of Georgia and you're a sailboat, there's going to be a lot of explaining to do. It's going to be awkward. I mean, they're coming at each other dead slow. Like at one point, it's hard to justify why you hit another boat. But if the boat's coming into you, at 20 knots or 30 knots and you're doing 6 knots and it's a freighter, right? And they can't change course. They can't adjust anything. Like they can't stop. They're going, right? Well, what's interesting about AIS is you'll have your AIS on your boat is going to tell you you're on a collision course. You better slow down or speed up past the freighter, because the two of you are going to hit and one of them isn't moving. So it's really up to you to adjust. And that's what AIS is really useful for. You can also choose to receive only, see other boats only, or you can choose to transmit your boat's position and course on ground, speed on ground, boat name, all this other information to other boats to see as well. So it can be a one-way street, you just hear, or you can talk and hear. And you can go silent. So in case you're wondering, well, I want to talk, but only sometimes, and sometimes I want to go boating and I don't want anyone to know, all my club members to know that I'm boating and I want to just be by myself in a bay and I don't want to be bothered, you can go silent. So it's not like always on, you can choose to turn it on or off. It's very popular. It's any navigation system that we do now, everyone is going to choose an AIS receiver. I don't think I've ever done one without one because it's like a VHF radio. You can buy it for about $200-$300. So if people are doing a radar, they're certainly going to be considering AIS. AIS is a fraction of a radar. And it offers, not similar, but it offers significant benefits to a boater. So it's worth thinking about when you're doing electronics on your boat. Pardon?
Is there a brand name?
No, that's a good question. Question, is there a brand name for AIS? And AIS is actually across all brands. Standard Horizon has really good VHF radios that have AIS built in. I think it's a Matrix 2250, an amazing product for like $350. You can have a VHF radio, phenomenal radio with a Class B receiver. So it's pretty fairly priced because a low-end VHF radio is what, $250, $200. So now you're getting a VHF radio with AIS for another $100, $150. In boat units, that's a fraction of a boat unit for pretty significant benefits. And every company, Garmin, Raymarine, Furuno, Simrad, I don't know if Lowrance does it, but B&G, oh my God, like Cytex, and then like this product, Vesper, I mean, everyone is in that space. Everyone, because everyone's gonna eventually have one. And this product is interesting. It's built out of New Zealand. There's a distributor, the national distributor for it is actually in the boat show across our booth. It's not something you typically see in the shelf at Steveston, but what's amazing about it is the integration and how low power draw it is. So if you're a boater, a power boater, or a sailboater that has very limited power availability and you want to leave something on all the time, this Vesper is really good, and it also can integrate with actually iPads. There's also one model that actually has a built-in screen. So we've got an owner that's doing the Vic Maui, and what they're doing is they're not going to need their chart plotter in the middle. I mean, a chart plotter is not going to show you anything other than GPS coordinates from Vic to Maui. I mean, what are you going to do? Like, there's nothing to look at. It's just water. So you can't leave that running because it's 2 to 3 amps all the time. You just need to know where you are, and you just need a GPS for that. And so it's not a chart plotter, but it shows you your GPS, and it's also transmitting your position and receiving position of other ships around you. So it's something that you can leave on 24/7. They'll turn the radar at night, and that's useful, but they don't really care about their chart plotter. A chart plotter functionality is not something they're going to be looking at. It's just blue, and it's going to be blue for a long time. So the Vesper is a really nice product, and it's a good price point. I did one on a Northaven. The client didn't want to have too much integration, didn't want to have all his eggs in one basket, and he ended up doing a Vesper on board just because it's something you just can leave on and never worry about what the power draw is. It's really tiny. And New Zealand does good electronics. They're a big sailing community over there. It got a lot of traction there, and I've been putting them for about 5 years on boats now. All right, when you're thinking about an autopilot, really you're going to be looking at about 3 different parts that make up an autopilot. You've got a control, so that's going to be like the display at the bottom. You've got a brain, so that's the processor box. That's where all the decisions are happening. And then the brawn is, the drive system. So it could be a linear drive on a sailboat, for example, connected to a quadrant, and it's moving the rudder, or it could be a hydraulic pump, right? On a lot of power boats, they have hydraulics, so it's a hydraulic pump, or it could be a chain drive system. So whatever, there's multiple ways of driving a boat in terms of running the steering, and that would be the brawn. What's interesting with autopilots now is that some of them, Furuno and Garmin, have the ability of not needing to be disabled to take the helm. If, for example, some autopilots, if you take the helm and you don't press standby, you could turn the helm hard over as fast as you can humanly do it to port, and the autopilot hydraulic pump is going to be pumping the fluid in the exact same speed that you're doing it to counteract your flow. So it's literally like you're downstairs and there's someone that's mirroring your actions at the exact same speed that you're doing it at the same time, following you, like literally left and right. So it's kind of a little crazy, right? So it's like having a cruise control in your car that you actually have to press a button to press a brake. So now that's actually, most autopilots are like that. So people just have to know that if you want to take the control of the helm, you have to go on standby. Some autopilots have the ability of having what's called a shadow drive, and they have a sensor that feels that if ever they're sensing movement from the helm, they know that the owner is not doing it by accident, and then they'll go on standby for that moment as long as they're feeling some sort of fluid moving from the helm, which means the owner's rotating the helm for whatever reason. And the moment that the helm is let go, they'll be on that standby course asking you, do you want to go back to your original course? So if you're going on a boat that's going 20 knots and you've got a deadhead ahead of you, it takes a certain amount of practice to know to press standby and then turn the wheel over. Or if you've got the practice, but maybe you've got a guest on board that doesn't really understand that, hard over, and then nothing happens because they didn't disable the autopilot. So it's something you can think about. And the other thing too that's really popular with an autopilot is the fact that people want to end up doing the autopilot following a route. That's really popular because in our waters, you actually never go where you're heading. You're like, what? But you never go where you're heading. Like you'll never ever go to where you're heading in a straight line. There's always a current acting on you other than your propulsion. Now, of course, if you've got a boat that's going 44 knots, the forces acting on you are minimal and probably negligible, and you're not going to feel them, right? Because there's two current, you're going 44 knots, you're going to be a little bit off course. But with an autopilot, what it does is you can actually follow a track. And a track is really from train tracks, and that means you're going to go from A to B, and I don't care how the vessel is going from A to B, it's never going to go pointed where it is because there's other forces on your boat other than propulsion. So you might be going A to B like this, but you're going to stay on that line from A to B. And that's what going to a waypoint allows you to do on an autopilot. When you point to a direction on an autopilot and you just go to a compass heading, you could actually be going here and you point there, but if you're doing a Strait of Georgia and there's an ebb, you're actually going to be literally going like this, right? If you want to go to your destination. And if you're just pointing to a direction and you don't change, you're like, oh yeah, that's where I want to go, I can see it, and there's a current, you're just simply going to go like this, right? Because they don't know what forces are acting upon you unless you connect it to a GPS. And autopilots don't have GPS. The Chartplotter has a GPS. So that's why it's really important to integrate the two. Otherwise, you're just pointing in a direction. And generally, if you just point to where you go, you're always going to do an arc. Or if it's a really long passage, you might go like this, back. So you're burning more fuel because you're going a longer distance to get from A to B. That's why an autopilot makes sense. And having it integrated into your Chartplotter. A few years ago, there was a lot of autopilots that had wired remote controllers. I say that right? But you'd have to plug it in, you'd walk around your boat, and there'd be a cord, and you'd walk around your boat, and you'd have a 30-foot tether back to some little socket on the wall. And that was all there was. Over time, Raymarine came out with a product in about 2005 with a wireless controller, which is really handy, and I have one on my boat, and I love it. So you can just literally be on your foredeck, and you can be dodging left, right. You can do whatever you want. It's like actually being at your helm, except you got to be quick though, right? Like if you want to slow down the engine, or if you hear a buzzer on the engine, overheating alarm, you're not going to do anything. You're not controlling your boat other than steering it, right? Everything, killing the engine, stopping the engine, revving the engine, going in reverse, all that has to still happen at the helm. but you can actually effectively steer your boat through your hand, which might be useful for putting fenders on the boat if you're coming into an anchorage, right? You're going to come to a marina, you're alone. You could either drift, potentially, or you can go at slow speed, 1 or 2 knots, and go out and have the wireless control, on your side on a lanyard, and you can be dodging stuff as you're going dead slow to the dock. So it's something to consider, and for a while there, the only people that had that solution was Raymarine. And I had one of my clients, that was for him, he was always boating by himself. And that was a big deal for him to be able to, have a remote control as he's going from the lower helm to the bottom helm. What if something happens and he needs to just dodge something? He's always considered, he couldn't have a second set of hands. And that was one of the decisions why he stayed with Raymarine, never went with Simrad, because he didn't have a wireless control. That little wireless control, it's tiny. So you can literally have it around your neck, right, on a lanyard. It's almost like a pass. And if something happens and you're like, oh my God, and you're not at the helm, you should, but if you're not, then you can dodge. I talked about earlier about the concept of this company out of the UK called Digital Yacht. Digital Yacht is really the integrator of all things electronic on a boat. That's kind of what they're going for. So trying to integrate NMEA 2000, 0183, CTalk, all these products to start talking to one another, and then taking all that information and relaying it to third-party apps. But what it does is it's taking all that data and then it's wirelessly communicating to any type of iPad, iPhone device. And you can have a device that's showing you, it's basically becoming instrument repeaters, right, without the instrument, right? So back in the day, you'd have, for example, sailors, racers would have literally an instrument on the mast. You'd have one on the bulkhead. You'd have one at the helm. I've got owners that have an instrument in their cabin. You have one down below at the nav table, right? Ideally, who doesn't want to know what depth and wind speed is pretty much any given time? It's not like, it's pretty useful, even an anchor, right? What's my depth? What's my wind speed? Those two things are kind of tied together. If you've got a high wind, your depth might change. So people would put instrument repeaters everywhere. So what they're doing now is they're actually taking that data and actually allowing you to have it maybe. There's a new product that just came out, this is my dream product. Garmin came out with a smartwatch that actually gives you all that data on your watch. So you could actually have a watch and you could be like, oh, what's the tide? And it shows you the tide. Oh, what's my wind speed right now? What's the depth? You can have that all literally, and you can even, with Garmin, it's even crazier, you can run your Autopilot from your watch. This is sick. Awesome. Anyways, what this thing does is it's a little bit for people that don't want to have a smartwatch, but want to have an instrument repeater maybe in their cabin, and they're a little bit worried it's a sketchy anchorage, and they want to know what's my wind speed, right? As it's hauling at night, what's my depth? We're really swinging, it doesn't feel safe. It happens, by the way, and if it hasn't happened to you, it will, unless you don't boat, it's gonna happen. And that would be a good way to have suddenly an instrument repeater down in the salon at 9 o'clock at night when it's hauling 35 knots, and you're like, wow, it really feels like it's windy. Like, what's the wind doing? What's my depth? And on this one, look at it, it even does a chart plotter, so you could actually follow your track, right? It's just showing, it's about information everywhere, anywhere, right? That's what it is, as opposed to being stuck in certain places. The other thing that I want to talk about is this new product that came out from Shakespeare. A lot of people want communications on their boats. That is a cell booster. It's pretty pricey. It's like $2,000. So that's just for the hardware. But it allows for owners that really want to have multiple users use a cell phone at the same time to be boosted, right? And it's for owners that go in also different types of networks that travel a lot. They might be going to the States, might be going to different places. That might be something to consider. But again, it's quite pricey, and we see it being done on bigger boats. Like or boats that have a lot of guests on board that need data is where that comes into play. Because then the data is not shared from your data plan, it's their data plan that's using it. So for some owners that don't really have all these guests on board, there are other solutions that are probably preferable to that from a cost perspective. But this might make sense for owners that really have a lot of friends on board, or their kids, or their friends' kids, and everyone's using data and everyone's complaining they don't have enough and they want better communication. This would be a way to have high upfront costs, but no ongoing costs. Standard Horizon has been doing VHF radios. I mean, that's their business. That's what they do. This radio, and they've been getting better and better, it's quite, look at it, 1 meter. So if, for a tender or whatnot, I always tell owners that it's a VHF radio is not a replacement for a permanently mounted VHF aboard your boat. Some owners say, oh, my VHF stopped working. I'm not going to bother fixing the antenna. I'm just going to have a handheld. My handheld works. Yes, a handheld works in close proximity to other places. But if you want to have the reach, generally you're going to need a bigger antenna than a little antenna that you're holding at sea level. So I always encourage owners to consider having a standalone handheld VHF for the tender, for emergency purposes, ditch bag and whatnot, and that's a really good radio, and still having a permanently mounted VHF on board to be able to reach faraway places when you're in the Strait of Georgia, right? Your handheld has limited wattage, like it's 1 watt or 5 watt. The fixed mounts can up to be 25 watts, so you've got way better reach and way better reception. The higher the antenna is, the further you can go. Cameras are something that is taking a lot of traction on boats. As the boats are getting bigger, I mean, this would not be a problem in the 70s. As boats are getting bigger, people don't have eyes everywhere. And so some owners are going to be on their flybridge, and the engine room is literally another layer and then another layer, right? It's not unusual. 45-foot boat, that's pretty common. So what they'll do is they'll install an infrared camera in the engine room, and if ever they get an alarm, they'll suddenly see the alarm and they'll be like, oh, without actually opening the hatch of the engine room or going through a little cubby door, if they've got smoke or something, they'll actually be able to see in the engine room in pitch darkness with those cameras. I've got owners that do cameras for towing a dinghy. They're on a 4788 Bayliner and they've got a split and they can't really look aft when they're in the pilot house. It's kind of, they really can't see, but they're towing a dinghy. And so what they'll do is they'll have a reverse fisheye camera looking back. And so as they're towing their dinghy behind them, they can actually see it. Other owners have a spouse on board, and when they're getting off the boat, they can't see when somewhere they're docking, who got off the boat. Are they off? Are they on? So they'll have a camera that looks along the dock and off the aft grid, because the boat is just, again, too big to be able to see everything. Some people have grandkids in the salon down below, you're in the pilot house, and you want to know that you're alone always on the pilot house, and you want to know that everyone in the salon is still on board. So these are the type of uses that people drive to having cameras. People end up putting also navigation thermal vision cameras. Still pricey. I mean, if it was cheap, everyone would have one. Especially allows, for nighttime or maybe dusk or low light situations, but they're very expensive. And the other thing too, that we wrote an article in PY, I think 2 months ago, and I've been doing that on some owners. Some owners just want to see their boat because they miss it. As simple as that. And I have owners that literally log in and they're working in all these places. They're unfortunately not able to see their boat every day, and I wish I could, but some of us can't. And so what they'll do is they're actually going to log in, and in times of probably duress at the office, they're going to look at their boat and they're going to be like, oh, feel better now. Everything looks fine. It's all there. She's good. And then you'll leave and come back. So a lot of people are using the security cameras not really because they're concerned of security. It's more kind of a feel-good, my boat's there, everything looks good. And you can actually have those cameras, if you've got a Wi-Fi connectivity in your marina or Wi-Fi on board, you can actually look at the inside of your boat on your phone. So, and they're not priced that expensively. So it's not a navigation thing, it's kind of more security if you've got a break-in. And I had one owner that, for example, had break-ins in his boat. He was being harassed. And so he went on a holiday. Before the holiday, he's like, I absolutely need to have a camera on my boat and I need a recorder because somebody's been breaking into my boat and I want to know who it is. And so we put a camera, kind of hid it, and there was a video recorder, and it's a service you can buy, and it keeps up to 30 days of video. So, I mean, that's unusual. It's the first time I had that request, but that would be something else. So Raymarine is owned by Flir, and they came out with, they're trying to bring the thermal imaging cameras at a better price point, and this is their latest venture into that. It can be really interesting too and I've seen it on other boats, thermal imaging, you'll spot someone in the water with thermal imaging like your eyes could never see it. I mean, they're gonna stand out like a sore thumb in the water, right? Their temperature, even though they're in the water, is completely different than the surrounding water. You can see deadheads, again, with a thermal imaging camera. Because the deadhead is actually not at the same temperature as the water. So they'll actually have it sync. So if you have a man overboard, you press man overboard when someone falls off the vessel, as you're moving away from that location, the camera is gonna lock into that location and keep pointing at that location without you actually having to figure out where that location is. So on bigger boats, certainly it's a popular option. All this is expensive, but it's a security thing on top of night vision or coming at dusk. It's my dream to have one of these cameras for simply the fact that I could leave in the wintertime as opposed to leave the anchorage at 2, I could leave at 5, and if I kind of know the area, it's local knowledge, and it's a 2-hour, motoring on a sailboat, I could come in at dusk and not just use radar, because radar sees things, but it doesn't see deadheads, right? It doesn't see a kayaker, and there's some people that are in canoes without lights at like 6 p.m. I've seen it, so I wouldn't see that. So that would be nice, and so you would see that with a thermal imaging camera. These are different screenshots of what you can see. You can see how people stand out, right? Or the outboards it's basically detecting heat. This is the Nest camera that I was talking about in the article in Pacific Yachting. Reasonable price point, you can buy them anywhere. This is not a marine camera, but it's starting to be used in marine applications for those boat owners that maybe their boat is in Sydney and they live in Calgary, right? Not everyone lives close to their boat, and this might be a good way for you to check on the boat. I had one of my technicians, Scott, was scared silly when the client was literally in Argentina, logged into the boat and said hi to Scott from the camera and tell them, oh yeah, by the way, I also forgot to tell Jeff, can you look at this? And Scott's like, what the hell is happening? So the owner logged in, seeing Scott work on his boat, they're familiar with each other, and he's like, I'm just simply gonna bypass Jeff, and I'm just gonna tell Scott, and Scott had no idea that this camera was on the board. He's doing his own thing, working on the electronics, and the client's giving him feedback. Like, that's awesome. And there's nothing wrong with it, The owner, he loves his boat, that's okay. Just wants to make sure that everything's the way that he wants it to be. So that's something you can do with that camera. There's a lot of integration with entertainment systems, so some boats might not have the space to have, or they'll be at the helm and they want to control music at the helm. They have a limited helm. Their helm is not that big. They can't have a deck there. They don't want to have a deck down below because they're never down below. They want to change music up at the helm. So what people are building black boxes that are integratable to displays. And I was telling you about the Garmin watch that just came out like literally 3 days ago. You can control the fusion system from your watch. So you're like, next, change the volume on your watch. I mean, that's change the zones. I'll put the music louder in the back, change the song, change the playlist. This is all possible by black boxes. And I've done some boats that are, 25 feet, and the owner's, always at the helm, and there's simply no need for him to have another display. He'll just operate the radio from the Chartplotter. So you can do that. So you can operate the Chartplotter, you can operate the stereo system directly from the Chartplotter. And all manufacturers are enabling that. Lowrance is an example of the Sonic Up. It's a refinement of a product line, but it's been around. And Garmin does it, Simrad does it, Raymarine does it. I don't think Furuno does it. They're slower. They take their time. They're Japanese. They do it their way. They'll eventually maybe cave in like 20 years, but don't hold your breath. But every other manufacturer is doing it. And it's something that might work out. Like for example, on my boat, my radio is down below, but sometimes you might want to lower the music because things have changed dramatically suddenly, right? Before it was benign, it was a good song, but suddenly the wind's hauled up or something's happened and the music needs to disappear instantly. Well, that would be easy to be, you're at the helm, you go, boom, off, right? Without having to leave the helm. You might not, because most of the time you've got the luxury of doing everything, but sometimes you don't have the luxury of doing anything. It's just that type of critical moment that we don't want to happen, but sometimes happens. And that would be the advantage of being able to have a black box integrated to all your displays. So you wouldn't have to run a wire to your upper helm to control the music. You could just simply install it down below, because running a wire from A to B is always expensive or time consuming. Either way, you either pay with time or money, but either way, it's not easy. And the last product is another product related to security. I've seen it's sad, there's been a few little break-ins recently, and some owners are a little bit worried about that. But the biggest thing that I see for these applications here in BC is for the owners that can't go to their boat every day or every week. And what they end up doing is having, for example, a few sensors on board. What would those sensors be, and what are things that you would check if you just came down to your boat? Let me know if I've got a high bilge alarm. Let me know I got a high bilge, right? That's a good thing that everyone would want to know every time that ever happens. ILOS, for example, I've got a low voltage situation. So that means your charger kicked off, you lost AC, something's wrong. What the cause of that problem is, you don't know, or the origin, but you want to know if your batteries are empty or they're low bat. You might want to know, for example, I have a low temperature in the boat. It's now below 7 degrees Celsius, right? Because now that's an indication that things might freeze, and a lot of us don't actually winterize our boats. You might want to say, motion detector. I've sensed motion. But the first few sensors I talked about aren't really related to a break-in. They're most related to, I can't go to my boat every day, and I want to know if something happens to my boat, those three incidents, that it's relayed to me on an iPhone, and it can be relayed to multiple people. It can be relayed to your son, a friend, a fellow boater at the marina. Like my boat's in Secret Cove. It could be relayed to whatever. I could have it to the marina manager and say, hey, by the way, if I've got a high bilge alarm, do you mind going check? He's got the keys. And so that's what it is. It's really remote monitoring of your boat, and it does it through cell phone. So you have to buy the hardware, around $300-400, and then you have to buy a yearly plan, which includes the cell phone connectivity, and it sends you basically updates on an app on your phone. So it's not for everyone, but it's interesting for owners that are, again, they live in Alberta. My boat's on the Sunshine Coast. I live here. I don't see my boat. I'm not going to see my boat for 4 weeks right now. I've got back-to-back. I'm doing Seattle, all these different things. And then so you're not on your boat for a long period of time. And so this would be a way to make sure that my boat is fine, temperature, water, battery voltage, which are really things that I care about. So that's a device that does that. All right, in conclusion, basically, I always try to emphasize, it's your choice. Do your own research. Don't copy what someone else is necessarily doing because they might not be doing what you want to be doing. Try the equipment out a lot. Roton is up there. There's a bunch of different, there's Harbor Chandlery, there's Steveston, there's Roton, there's Stryker. Try the equipment out. Not all equipment is made for everyone. Some people are more designed or better suited for other ones, left brain, right brain. Talk to the experts. There's tons of people. There might be people that install the equipment, there's people that sell the equipment, there's a lot of blogs online on top of it. There's a lot of resource. And the reason I say all these things is because realistically, you're not going to be changing that equipment for 10 to 15 years. And that's a long commitment if your decision was in the right one. And so I'm going to open the floor. We've got a few minutes for questions. Does anybody have any questions? No? Yes, go ahead.
About a year ago, I read something in one of the boating magazines that Flir was coming out with a much, much cheaper product, and it was available in the States, and it was hundreds of dollars as opposed to thousands.
Yeah,
You're hoping to bring, do you know about that?
Yeah. That is more of a tool. It's a thermal imaging camera on your iPhone, and it's used to, let's say, if you can look at your electrical panel, you can scan for hot points. It's not used for distance. You can't use it for navigation, but it's used for like a home inspectors, looking for a hot spot on your engine or a cold spot on your engine. Like, is my coolant being distributed evenly in my boat? Looking at your heat exchanger, looking at the hoses on your boat, on your engine, sort of stuff like that. Your fridge, you can look at your fridge, look for leaks. It's really close quarters. It's more for the renovation, general contractor. It's very affordable. It's like a couple $100, but it's because it can use for Flir. Any thermal imaging there's a huge, you can't just buy a camera in the States and buy it here, bring it here. Like literally this would be like, there's rules, it could be military grade. And so they can't sell to all countries, including Canada. There's certain product lines that just simply can't come across the border. It's illegal. So that's why, and that product simply isn't allowed for exporting now. Any other questions? Yes?
You keep referring to iPhone, iPad?
Yeah.
Can you use other tablets?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Android tablets from Samsung. Yeah. The only downside with those tablets, is if an app is going to come out, the apps are always going to come out with iPad first. And the reason is that iPad and iPhone owners spend more money on apps than everyone else. So if you're an app designer, and I have all my classmates that are, and you want to make money, you're going to target iPhone owners because there are these people that are willing to spend a lot more money. So they do that first, and then they'll do Android, because Android, even though there's as many devices out there, those people don't spend as much money on stuff as people within the iPad, iPhone, Apple family. So you just have to always wait. That's the only downside. But all the big stuff are out there. All right, I think I'm going to let you guys go because there's a presenter in the back, and I think it's their turn. All right, thank you, everyone.